I've just started recording. So that's this session of Active Recoverable CAF, must not call it Ideas with Beers by mistake, up and running. And so without further ado, I think we'll just do a quick news roundup on what's going on around the UK. And Bob, should we start with you, if that's all right?
Yeah, okay. First of all, thanks for your wishes to me, everybody, during my recent couple of weeks stay in hospital. I'm out now, and I have been released into the wild, and so I will be doing some stuff online. Still not actually meeting people in person because of being immunosuppressed, but I am out, I am available, and I am working, and thanks for all your best wishes from me, various people. Okay, a couple of reports. House of Lords Built Environment Committee, public transport in towns and cities. The inquiry reports a consensus among experts and policymakers that a reduction in trips by private car of the order of 30% is needed to help meet net zero targets. I'll put the link in the chat. I'm not doing slides. I've been asked not to do that for this. So I'm just whipping through a few reports. The next one is the report from Imperial College on low traffic neighbourhoods. LTNs reduce air pollution within and around intervention areas. That's a report from Audrey Nazell and colleagues from the Imperial College study. Also, in terms of things that have been happening in London, I don't know if Simon Monk's here, but you've probably been reading that the ultra-low emission zone has gone ahead. It was part of the mayor's policies, but there was a kind of study which went out and said a lot of people don't like it. There were problems with that study. And anyway, the thing is, it's going ahead with a policy, looking at consultation, but going ahead with what you've decided. The only thing wrong with it is that it's still basically the old ultra-low emission zone. It's not about actual traffic reduction yet, not about smart charging yet. So that's something that needs to be looked at. Now, just a thought from me to throw in there, particularly to those of you who are women. As you know, there's been the Cycling UK list of 100 women in cycling. That's been coming out every year the last few years. And I've been privileged to know a lot of the women over the last few years who've been on that list. And believe me, they are very dynamic, very hardworking, very effective in various ways to support cycling. And they are also, I dare say, role models for the, I would love the young women and girls in my family to end up like them. And a lot of them are people who take part in Active Travel Cafe. And I think that's great, that's wonderful, inspirational. But as you know, I take a kind of half glass empty view of these things. And I would say what we need to be looking at more is what's wrong often rather than what's right. So I think a number of things like reasons that some women give for pursuing and continuing with car owning, car dependent lifestyles need to be looked at, need to be addressed, particularly issues around security and safety, and the kind of reasons or perhaps excuses that women use need to be addressed, and it would have to be to a large extent by women. And to think about that kind of slander rather than the good things, rather than how women have been won over to supporting low traffic neighborhoods, cycle lanes, etc. How women have changed their lifestyle. That's all very good and positive, but I think we need to look at the kind of negative side of it. Just a thought to throw into your hardworking and active and creative brains. Thanks very much. Let's see what else is happening in Britain.
Thank you, Bob. That's excellent roundup and massive provocation at the end there, which we like. Yes. Okay, let's go around. Who else has updates from their neck of the woods? Anybody else want to follow up on? Ruth, over to you. And then anybody else, stick your hands up if you've got an update from where you are.
Thanks very much, everybody, and nice to see you back, Bob. So 2 things from my neck of the woods, Chiswick. Last week we had Chiswick Area Forum, which is what's put on by local councillors, and it wasn't quite as awful as the Haringey one, where I don't know if any of you saw it, there was lots of screaming and shouting and blowing of whistles in the streets. But it was pretty aggressive, and a few of us had kind of rounded up people to be supportive. Our head of transport was there, and our lead councillor for transport did their best. The chair, who's one of the 8 Tory councillors in our neck of the woods who don't want any of the cycle infrastructure, or they do want safe cycling, but not here and not now and not there and not, you know, where it's useful. They allowed lots of statements and not questions, and we didn't get the time to ask the kind of really important questions that are key, you know, like why did those traffic lights not work, cycling and that kind of stuff. That wasn't me belching, by the way. But one woman stood up and said, well, I cycle with my children, it's been revelatory, absolutely fantastic, and I think it's the best thing ever. And because she was someone not known to who was in the hall, who were mostly, have to say, my age, but never cycle, it was wonderful, and it changed the whole mood, and we were able to finish much more successfully. So it is worth kind of persisting with going to those meetings. And I know a lot of people don't want to put their heads above the parapet, but please, please, please do. But this morning I went to our local state school, Chiswick School, which is in a traffic island, to talk to the student council about how they get to school. And the Labour councillor for the area came and also asked them their issues. All their issues, there were 10 or 11 of them from year 7 to year 10, were around too much traffic. It was quite interesting because one child kind of said, well, if they opened all the roads again, the traffic could flow much better. And I thought, oh, her parent knows that she was coming to a talk on school streets. But when I asked them about why they didn't cycle to school, it was all the same. It's too dangerous. There's not enough space. We don't get priority on the roads. And some kids said, well, we can't afford bikes. We simply don't have access to bikes. So that is, and you know, we're in kind of a quite comfortable part of London. But I was a bit worried that cycling wasn't really on their radar either for some of them, and that is a bit of a worry. But the guy who's in charge of the school council has agreed with me that we can go forward with calling them eco-ambassadors, and that one of their things for this term and going forward next term will be about safe routes to school, walking around the school and picking out the areas in the streets that are a problem. And finally, one of the things that I have to say our council, who are very good, had done was that the route from the park, which is a lovely way to access the school, ends with what I call a kangaroo crossing. So instead of coming out the exit to the park straight into the entrance of the school, you have to go along the pavement, go into a refuge, along the pavement, back again. So none of the kids do it. They will just want to walk straight across, and they should have every right to. And what we need is more raised tables. Anyway, I'm just kind of saying we all have to persist. And I know you all know this, but it's quite hard when there's so much resistance. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you, Ruth. And sorry about your tiny little burpy interruption there. I don't know where that came from. Randomness of the internet must be. Right, we've got Mark, Louise, and then Adam, if you keep it swift, because we want to get on to our speakers. Robin's coming up in a minute. So Mark, over to you in Brighton.
Yeah, so you might have seen lots of fuss about the bike hangers in Brighton last week, which made the Sun, Jeremy Vine's show, and all sorts of other things, which is a bit odd given that councils in London have been doing many more than us for many years. And suddenly it happens in Brighton, it makes the news. So strike a vote for provincial angry women pointing at bike hangers. But all the bike hanger people I spoke to said it was great because it got them interest. There's no such thing as bad publicity. That's it.
Brilliant. Thanks, Mark. Amazingly on the point. Brilliant. Okay, brilliant. We're coming to you, Louise, next.
Just from Haringey to say, I'm sure you've all noticed we're in the eye of the storm at the moment. Anything you can do to support us would be helpful. Like on social media, every time Perry Ahmet, our kind of leader, posts anything, or Micah Carter, there's a massive pile-on. So, you know, if people can help on social media, that would be really good, just punching holes in kind of a lot of the anti kind of fallacies that get pushed around. So that's that's number one. And number two is kind of, if anybody wants to cycle around our wonderful 3 low traffic neighbourhoods, I mean, together they form like a mini Holland. It's particularly the Bruce Grove one is really big. So if anybody in London's up for that, do reach out to us, and you could cycle with us through these areas to get a feel for what's happened in Haringey. But yeah, please do support us in whatever way you can.
Thanks, Louise. Even if we're not pedaling around your lovely, lovely LTNs, I'm sure we're all with you in spirit, but let's make an effort. We could have a big day out in Haringey. Brilliant. Adam, over to you.
Yeah, just as I speak, the planters are going in for the first LTN or livable neighbourhood in Bath, and also probably for the west of England in terms of the funding programme, which is quite exciting to see. There's 3 more to go in, hopefully in the next week or so, and they're finishing off the. I don't know if anybody else has got any of their tranche 2 schemes from the Active Travel Fund, but they've just finished off building those or implementing those. But they expect the actual completion for a lot of this infrastructure to go into January. I noticed that Brian Deegan mentioned that they'd already started doing audits of schemes, and I don't know if those audit reports have started coming out. And I'm guessing that's from completed tranche 2 schemes. If anybody has any information on that, I'd be very interested to see if that's going to be publicly available, or we're going to have to do FOIs to get them.
Thanks, Adam. Brilliant stuff. If anybody can follow up and has any info for Adam on that, you could post it in the chat. And then I'm guessing come to you, Jamie in York. Unless Kate's going to bob in. You're on mute, Jamie. So
you're quite right. My apologies. No, I'm just going to speak about it. We're alternating between making dinner, which is why I've got the 2 names up. So yeah, I just wanted to update, and it really segues on from exactly what Adam was saying before, was that we've just had a bit of a kerfuffle in York because the council has just declared that it's essentially pulling every single active travel scheme that it was awarded the money for on the grounds that it didn't have enough money to actually implement the schemes that it bid for and received the money for. So effectively, we've been left with almost nothing being implemented from the active travel funding portfolio in tranches 1 and 2. And then they've deployed the money on creating a gold-plated scheme on somewhere which didn't really need it in the first place. So I would kind of be interested to know what people have to say about whether this is a common thing that's happening to other places. That basically now what they're saying is LTN 120 is too expensive to do. Sorry.
No, thanks, Jamie. And not without its ironies, given the organisation that's become based in York. Not great. Beth, did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, it was just to say that recently Active Travel England have been in touch with local authorities and invited them to submit a change control request for ATF3 schemes. So essentially what they're saying is they acknowledge that some councils have been saying that they now can't afford, due to inflation and other pressures, they can't afford their schemes. So they're inviting councils to apply for more money, basically. So not for new schemes or more schemes, but to complete the schemes that they had already said they were going to complete. The deadline for that is mid-December. So there is still a chance maybe for York.
Thanks, Beth. And finally, Becky, we'll come to you and then we'll head on over to Robin for our first presentation. Becky.
Thanks. I just wanted to mention that there's a report going to the South Downs National Park Authority, and they're set to approve a £10 million replacement bridge at Exeat, which is near the Cuckmere River. It's a beauty spot near a Seven Sisters Visitor Centre. There's virtually nothing in this scheme for cycling. It will just save car drivers just a small amount of time, but it risks speeding up the traffic. It's another East Sussex County Council proposal, and this is National Cycle Network Route 2, so it's bad all round, and we have objected twice, and it's on the 8th of December. I'll put the link in the chat, but it's not good news at the moment because they're set to approve it. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Becky. If you pop that in the chat, and I'm sure anybody that can support, email with support or message in, that'd be brilliant. Okay, well, without further ado, slightly depressing news roundup there. Robin, you're going to have to pick our spirits up pretty massively now. after that. So no expectation, nothing there. So off you go, Robin, over to you.
We'll see what Emily and I can do. Right. Screen share. And away we go. Have you got that?
Yep, that's working great, Robin.
Great. Okay, so a view from the Shire, and I'm chair of the Oxfordshire Cycling Network and co-chair of a wider organisation called COSAT, which I'll come on to a bit later. But I want to give you two stories here today. One about Oxford and transport in Oxford itself, and then a bit of my campaigning journey and some lessons learned from that. And Emily and I have coordinated enough, I think, that she'll be able to pick up some threads from that and continue those with her presentation. But we haven't rehearsed it completely, so but we both think in terms of slides and PowerPoint, so we'll see how we go. So I'm going to start with World War II and Oxford's first Great Escape, which was from Hitler and the Luftwaffe. That Hitler apparently wanted to build his capital in Oxford, or at least appreciated the architecture, and so didn't bomb Oxford during the war. And so we didn't get what you get in Coventry, or maybe the friendly bombs fell on Slough, but we didn't get that urban clearance and space for road building. And then after the war, there was this urban planner called Thomas Sharp who came up with this, he wrote a book called Replanning Oxford, which imagined clearing vast areas of houses, cutting a big road across Christchurch Meadows. But Oxford has, the colleges didn't like it, and Oxford, of course, has this great ability to debate and discuss things rather than actually decide and get things done. So that plan kind of festered all the way through the 50s and the 1960s and never actually happened. One bit of it did happen. There was a suburb called St Ebbs, and that was demolished to make way for this lovely road which goes past the ice rink and what's Westgate Shopping Centre, which is probably the bit of Oxford that looks most like Slough, most like a kind of urban inner ring road, and is one of the least pleasant pieces to cycle. So that's great, and so far so disastrous. But most of it didn't happen, and so we've got this picture of building congestion in the city as traffic builds up, and not much space for it to go because most of the roads are still quite narrow and medieval. And because of that, and because it's a small city with kind of one medium-sized hill in it, cycling stayed popular. This is my hypothesis, at least. And people used to cycle to all across the city. Of course, students would cycle, people would cycle to the Cowley Works in East Oxford to build the Morris cars, of course. And this continued, and as traffic built, Oxford had to innovate and find other ways of taming the traffic, giving people alternatives. So Oxford was the first successful park and ride service, introduced in 1973, first in one site and then another very shortly afterwards, and that continues to this day. In 1999, we introduced bus gates on the high street, and people predicted traffic chaos, and a hotelier called Jeremy Mogford said that it would be the death of the high street, and the businesses all along here would close and pedestrianisation would be a disaster. And indeed, he was in the County Hall today saying exactly the same thing would happen, having made lots of money out of hotels and restaurants along the very street that he said would be a disaster. And of course, it worked perfectly, and this street would be an utter nightmare if cars were still allowed down there. And so we come to the plan that was discussed today, the Central Oxfordshire travel plan, which really means Oxford and a bit beyond Oxford. And it's got actually 22 actions in it, 3 big ones, 6 central traffic filters. If you're familiar with the kind of thing they've done in Ghent and Groningen, the classic Dutch segmentation process where you can essentially drive from one part of the city to another by going around a ring road. It's a bit like that, but you can't go through. It's a bit like that, but it's planned to operate from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. and all residents of the city would get 100 permits. Emily's actually going to talk a bit more about this later. The second part is a zero emission zone, which currently operates on a few number of streets but would expand. The third part is a workplace parking levy, much like Nottingham's, and that decision came today and the scheme was approved, so that is now going ahead. So Emily's going to talk a bit more about that, so I'm going to shut up and start my second journey, which started when this is my campaigning journey, which started in 2013 when Graham Smith, who's known to many of this parish, came along to a Cycling UK, CTC as it was at the time, AGM, and said how bad cycling infrastructure was and kind of enthused me into it. I thought, oh, I can help fix this. And from that, I realised that there were lots of campaigners across the county, all campaigning on individual things with individual messages, but we had this county transport authority, the county council, that was getting different messages from different people, and so we needed to bring one organisation together. So 12 of us met in the floods of 2014 and agreed to form the Oxfordshire cycling network. I was struck by Jamie commenting about the problems you were having in York and the similar ones in, I think it was Brighton or Bath. We actually had similar problems when the Plain Roundabout was redesigned a previous time under Cycle City Ambition grant funding, and it was basically redesigned by the buses, and then a Riverside path was expanded basically with cycling money, but mostly for people walking. And we used that as an impetus to meet with councillors and MPs and manage to kind of get ourselves a bit more engaged with the system. So there's a message in that in terms of trying to use these adverse effects to get yourself plugged in a bit more constructively rather than critically, if you can use them to your advantage. We built alliances, so we found common ground with the bus companies. We have a lot of new housing developments. It turns out that they were not being designed well for the buses, as well as not well for cycling. And we tried to also to set out positive vision. We created a vision for a county-wide strategic cycling network, a bit like an LC Whip, but for the whole county, not just for a town or a city. And now actually that is being developed into an official county council version by PJA, good old Phil Jones and company. It will be out for consultation soon. That was not just a network plan, but that was specifically aimed at fueling our campaigning activities. And this is some activity we did at the 2017 county council elections. And we got at the bottom, we've got some of the candidates from Conservatives, Labour and Lib Dems all putting their kind of space for cycling ballots into a vote bite box that we had. And through that kind of activity, we made active travel much more part of the an election agenda, so that the councillors considered it an election issue. They considered it, and they, having been elected, they considered they had a mandate to go forward to it. So a few lessons learned from that. We've always been looking for common ground with councillors and more recently officers about how can we help them achieve their goals, talking their language and showing that we can bring some values, looking for allies in likely places. So in most cases, we're working with the bus companies. A few places we don't agree with them. They're not so keen on 20-mile-an-hour limits everywhere, whereas we are. And it certainly turned out to be a long haul. So I think you've got to do the bits that you enjoy what you're doing. And the advantage of being a long distance cyclist is that you know that every turn of the pedals brings you closer. So if you could find joy in small wins. But today we have had quite a big one, and it was quite pleasant seeing the protest. We had Piers Corbyn turn up, and this was the protest he managed to rustle up afterwards, which was quite amusingly pathetic. So over to Emily for another side of the Oxford story.
Brilliant. Thanks, Robin. Over to you, Emily.
Great. I'm just trying to share my PowerPoint. Hold on a second.
I stop the share.
Can you all see that?
Yes, that looks great.
Okay, hold it.
You want to start the presentation mode?
Yeah, exactly. Which is in slideshow.
I like the way you make it look like you've never done it before.
I know, I feel it's two always makes me feel a bit self-conscious. Great. So yes, I'll be picking up some of Robin's points, but what I'm talking about today, it's the vision for active travel in Oxford, and also I've chucked in some other stuff that we're doing. I'm a city councillor. It's worth noting that the county is the transport authority, but we work pretty well and pretty cooperatively in Oxford, as I'm about to tell you on the first slide. So yeah, so it's been a fairly cross-party strategy, and crucially, it's been going on a while. So really since 2015, where the county was Conservative blue and the city was red. We then had a reiteration in 2019 called Connecting Oxford, just pre-COVID, same split. And then by 2022, the county is now a coalition, which is Green, Labour and Lib Dem, and City is still red. And I think we've really started to shift from words to actions under this coalition. Robin may have a different perspective, but also we do work a lot with other constituent businesses, but particularly the universities, in designing the vision for the future of Oxford. So our vision then, this came from the Vice-Chancellor's speech, and I was very pleased to hear it, talking about imagining a future student arriving by bicycle on one of the car-free routes. And I think we're really sort of looking for that. We want to have beautiful public spaces with space for people. We want a great cycle network. We want to have 20-minute neighbourhoods. We want to have a carbon neutral flagship bus system. And we want to have a significant reduction in congestion on our roads and massively reduce journey time for buses. And here's some visuals of, like Broadmeadow, which I'll tell you about in a minute, and kids playing. So therefore, there are clear targets. So Oxford's goals on the left-hand side, minus 25% of car trips. Sorry, this is Oxfordshire's goals. Minus 25% of car trips by 2030, minus 50% by 2040. And when you bear in mind that we're a rapidly growing county, this is in absolute terms, so not relative. So we are going to have to cut in absolute terms per user more than this. Net zero transport by 2040 and vision zero by 2050, which I want to be earlier and we'll talk about later. This middle triangle then is a transport hierarchy which was kind of approved maybe sort of quietly a few months ago because it didn't kick up a big fuss, but it's now how everyone is looking at things. Like, we want people to be walking if they can, cycling and riding if they can't, then public transport, then motorcycles, then shared cars, either borrowed cars, so not cars owned, or lift sharing, and then right at the bottom is private cars. And here's just some targets in terms of commuter modal share, 30% commuting modal share by bike 2020 and up to 50% by 2035. I hope we'll reach these targets earlier, but it's what's been kind of signed off and agreed. Okay, so this rather busy slide is talking about the 4 big infrastructure plans for this year and next year. So LTNs, sort of number 1 on that little bucket on the left-hand side down here, we've introduced them over the last year and a half of them are now permanent. I'm going to talk about these in a minute. The big news, it was today, as Robin has said, so bus gates, traffic filters. I've put in consultation. That's because this is an old slide. It was decided on this afternoon. So, the aim is to reduce traffic, a massive, like 20 to 30% in the city centre, increase bus and park and ride usage, reduce accidents, improve air quality, all these amazing things. It's been a long path getting here. It really has. And one of the things I'd love to just talk about is it's not just obviously councillors doing this, like that the campaign groups support this with data, you know, with analysis, with persistence. Like, it's so important in terms of the decision makers to be able to supply people with a lot of data and a lot of support. And there's just been some really innovative stuff that we've done here, or rather not that I've done, that the campaign groups have done, which I'll talk about in a minute. Number 3, the ZEZ Zero Emission Zone. That is being reviewed for next year. And number 4 is a workplace parking levy. So I think the ZEZ is the first city that's done this, but it's effectively operates like a ULEZ, you know, anyway. And then the workplace parking levy, again, I think Nottingham's done this, so we're trying to roll out something similar. The dates for them are not yet clear, but there'll be more clarity in January. So I think the good news is that we are genuinely doing a lot of stuff that's been talked about previously, and it's now happening. So the LTNs have been a big deal. These are in my ward, which is a city ward, so it's just in the centre here. Here's a map of Oxford. I've shaded these grey areas as previous LTNs because these are areas that were not called LTNs, but have got old filters on them. They've been filtered for a long time, 20 years in many cases, or some of them are even built more, you know, with kind of strategic kind of closed off to traffic. But when you look at it like this, you realize that these 3 Cowley LTNs, which were launched back in 2021, were the places that were missing between the 2 main roads. And then my ward, it's actually only 3, because this is sort of one big LTN here, and this is an existing one. But basically there's 3 LTNs, the East Oxford LTNs. These are the ones that you will have seen us talking about on social media, and they launched in May of this year. So this has been, you know, these have all been huge things that have happened. The LTNs have been put in place. The recent one's been going for 6 months, and these other, so number 2 has just been signed off, it's going ahead, and 3 and 4 will be discussed January next year. Finally then, so what else are we doing? So I think there's 3 other really important things that have happened. I've got a slide that shows the whole plan with everything laid out if anyone's interested in having that, but like, here's sort of 3 other kind of flagship things. So we have this area in the centre of Oxford called Broad Street. It's brilliant, it's very pretty, it's very famous, it's where all the tourists come. It's got this round building here in the background called the Radcliffe Camera, which is very famous, and the Bodleian Library and all that. And for a long time it was a car park. In fact, until October it was a car park, and now it is not a car park. And this is just joyous for those of us who live in the city. I mean, it's not rocket science. Europe did this, you know, 30, 40 years ago, but it really feels great to have that gone, and this space, which is, here's just a visual from a couple of days ago from the covered market. You know, there's a lot of people enjoying this space, whereas this is the same angle picture, slightly zoomed in, as I've got here. It used to just be cars. It is now available for markets. There were always Christmas markets there. There are now bigger Christmas markets, and people feel safer, and it's just great. That is one of the other 3 things. The county's adopted Vision Zero, which, you know, was really pushed on by a number of campaigning groups and the university and councillors, and, you know, a lot of people following 4 tragic deaths. 4 deaths of young female cyclists in the last 2 years. Robin and I have attended Cyclox held vigils for the last 3 of them. It was just devastating to go and hear their families talk about the fact that these people didn't need to die. So anyway, that's a big deal. The third thing has been 20 miles an hour across the city and in villages and towns who want it. So it's been possible for people to apply to their county councillor for a speed reduction in their village and city, and, you know, that's happening. So that's all very good news. Slightly randomly, I've been involved in 3 other things, you know, which I'm very interested in because I have a tech background. The first one's car sharing. You know, I think car sharing challenges the paradigm of car ownership, and I'm really interested in scaling it rapidly through peer-to-peer stuff, or you know, encouraging more car sharing companies like Co-Wheels, Zipcar, Enterprise to come into towns and cities. The second thing we're doing, which is probably not relevant at the moment, unless you live in Cambridge, is about college delivery. So we're looking at getting all colleges to get all their parcels delivered to a place out of town, and then getting it in last mile by cargo bikes once a day. And that will make a massive difference to the LGVs in the city centre, and therefore cycling safety. The third thing, which is a bit more speculative, is cable cars. Like, could we look at having urban aerial transit in Oxford? Not sure we're there yet, but it'd be very cool. Paris is launching them in 2025. They've started construction. Toulouse has launched one in 2022. Is this something that could provide an interesting solution? I think it could be. Who knows? I wanted to talk quickly about 2 engagements that we've done recently, because I think they're quite cool. So that the first thing is, we went into some sixth formers a couple of weeks ago and took out some massive printed maps, which I think I might have in here, but I maybe don't, like really big A1 maps printed out, and got them put stickies on where they felt dangerous cycling, and then write some comments in the margins of the map or on post-its, or like however they chose to do it, talking about where they have problems. And that was really useful, very engaging. These kids cycle to school on their own, so it really made me understand how things are different as a young child, or as a teenager. For me, there are a couple of crossroads, for example, that I don't find particularly scary because I can see over the cars, but they can't. So they talked about how some 2 residential crossroads were like a real danger point for them. It's not for me. I would never have known that, but simply because they're a fair amount shorter than me still, like it's an issue for them. So that's number 1. The second thing we've done, which I'm very pleased with, is that we've used Google Maps, which is super flexible and amazing tool. We've got shared access to it, and we've been putting the comments from the schools, which actually are in purple, and other comments from a whole group of us. We've categorized so for example, here we've got like signposts means we need better signposts, obviously. This means we need a better crossing here. This is like we could use some trees or some landscaping. We need better cycling provision, etc. And the idea is to kind of capture this for future funding bids, so that we know where people that really live on the ground challenges are. So yes, everybody knows that the plain roundabout is a nightmare, but I, for example, until I sent this to mums at school, didn't realise that the absence of a drop curb on Ridgefield Road, which is a small residential route, was really problematic for mums with buggies that walked that way to the nursery school. And actually, drop curbs are not expensive. I went and did it myself with a buggy, and I was like, oh yeah, this is a nightmare. And it's stuff like that not because it happens to have a very high curb and a very difficult road to cross. Real sort of user experience there. And obviously this could be more comprehensive, and it could have been done by officers, in which case it probably would have been more comprehensive. But the great thing is it was extremely easy. So we just got a load of parents, a load of kids to contribute. I think 11 of us have got edit access. And so we've sort of added in those comments. Any questions, or how does questions work? Steve, maybe over to you.
Yeah, brilliant. Emily, that was amazing. Robin, thank you so much. Earlier on, Emily, I did have a little pot shot at management consultants, which I didn't realize I was inadvertently insulting our 2 keynote speakers. So I'd like to apologize for that. That was brilliant. I'm sure I'm not alone in thinking we'd all like you as our counsellor, please, if you wouldn't mind moving to where we are. Immediately, actually, could do you next week. Also, Jill in Manchester is right. We're all going to take a trip to Oxford as quickly as possible because we're quite giddy and excited about all that. So that was absolutely brilliant. Who's got hands are flying up? So that's how questions work, Emily. Bob's so keen. He's actually waving and he's got his hand up at the same time. So Bob, I take it you want to go first, Bob. Yeah.
Yeah. I think actually the Landor conference on walking and cycling was a very good one in Sheffield this last year. I think it's going to be in Oxford next year, and so that would be a good one for people to turn up to and to have a look around. Few points. Emily, is your surname Kerr or Carl? Because it's
what
Carl.
a great question. So it is actually Kerr, that's how it's always been pronounced. But when I became a counsellor, I decided it would make everyone's life easier if I pronounced it Kerr. And so I mostly pronounce it Kerr, and everyone mostly calls it Kerr, but occasionally I forget because I did spend 42 years calling it Kerr. So, it is Kerr. Let's just say Kerr for the purposes of everyone being easy.
Because
Good
if
question,
it was
though.
Kerr, you would be not nominatively determined. Yeah, a few things also. Personally, I would avoid the kind of fancy glitzy stuff like the cable cars, and try and get it down to simple stuff like 15-minute city things to be more basic. Notice little point, motorcyclists I thought were a bit too high up the hierarchy. A few things there. I think the experience, a lot of people going to Oxford, if you come out of the station, there are loads of bikes at the station, and then there's a whole history about Friedwald Square and that area outside, about shared space and how it works or doesn't work. So I don't know if you want to say anything about those things, about where we are on that. Either you or Robin, whatever.
Can I go?
Yeah, Robin, for you.
Yeah, totally. So first of all, actually, somebody has already put on the chat, you're absolutely right about the Landor conference. The Cycle County Active County conference will be in Oxford on the 5th and 6th of July. And we're all desperately keen to think about the kind of good, the bad, and the interesting of Oxford cycling and walking and wheeling infrastructure to take everyone around. It is quite near the LTNs. It is reasonably near, it is very near actually Broad Street as well. So plenty of stuff to show you all. That bit between the station and the centre of Oxford, that is utterly one of my bugbears. The right answer for that is not a timed traffic filter. It is a proper no motor vehicles at all, just walking and cycling. So you get a nice calm gateway to the city. Any remaining motor traffic can go round. There's a parallel road, Park End Street, and then you get a much simpler junction. And every time I get the chance, I tell people this, and it hasn't been done. Maybe in a couple of years' time we'll get it done. But what we'll do is we'll take the conference around, and then we'll have 100 active travel professionals all agreeing that this is what needs to happen.
Thanks.
Thanks, Robin. And I'm going to crack on, Emily, if that's all right. I'm going to crack on with some of the other people we've got waiting, because we've got quite a few. So I might do Adam, if you want to go first, and then Tim.
Yeah,
and
just the
Dave want to come in.
Yeah, the workplace parking levy. What are your expectations on timelines? Because the Nottingham one, I think, took about 10 years in terms of getting all the legislation through. I was just wondering where your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're hoping for like 23, 24. It has been discussed, but a very long time. Like I say, I think it needs special approval. It needs Secretary of State approval. So, that's not necessarily going to happen, immediately. But we are looking for it soon. Businesses are preparing. Businesses are talking about it. 23 may be optimistic, but certainly, relatively soon. Robin, what's your perspective?
Yes, I wouldn't disagree. I think it's unlikely that it comes in before the traffic filters. So we've got this thing where the railway bridge on Botley Road, which is the road to the west of Oxford, is being replaced, and that whole road is going to be closed for a year. And therefore the council has said, we're not going to institute the traffic filters for a year, which is the wrong answer, because they should put some in just to minimise the traffic coming in from the rest of the town, and implement that. They can't do it for 6 months because they've got to get the IT ready, but maybe they could start them in 6 months. But they're not going to start for a year. So I would guess it will probably take a year to get ready. So if I had to put money on it, I would say 2024, but I would love it to be mid-23.
Because you have a very different system in Oxford, where you have like a working groups for transport, which I think is better than the cabinet system. So I'm guessing that allows you to kind of work better over longer, rather than worry about election cycles as much as be able to get these things through.
No, it's a cabinet system, but I mean, people do work with each other, and there are various teams and consultations, informal consultations and things that happen as well.
It's a cabinet system at county. You may be thinking of the fact that the 3 cabinet members who have kind of partial responsibility for transport stuff work fairly collectively and meet fairly frequently, and that is a Green, a Lib Dem and a Labour. Duncan Enright for Labour, Andrew Gant for Highways, and Pete Sudbury for Greens on net zero. So that might be what you're thinking about. But yeah, I mean, it's Andrew Gant.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Thanks, guys. Tim, just before I bring you in, could I be really cheeky and squeeze in front of you, just to follow that up with a quick question, Robin and Emily, on the workplace parking levy, because a large city in the north that I may be plugged into might be considering that. I'm not going to say which one. But is there any way that you could let us know how business has reacted to it? Have you had any sort of debate amongst the business community around it yet?
I'm just going to say we're probably not the absolute best people to do this. Simply, well, I'm not, because it's city council. I'd say some businesses are supportive, some are less supportive, honestly.
Yeah, I think so. I'd agree. The university, which is the biggest employer in the city, has said we support it, but they're a very special case. There are lots of small retail businesses which say we don't like it, but we know that those businesses have a record for overestimating how much of their businesses arrives by car. So they've gone through a tough time recently because of COVID and online shopping and recession and 101 other things. So they have reasons to be grumpy about anything.
Thanks, Robin. Tim, I'm going to bring you in now because I got in your way there. That was inexcusable. Tim, over to you.
I was going to answer your question, Steve, as well. So great presentations. Thank you very much. I saw yours to the APPG, Emily, earlier. So some of that looked very familiar, but brilliant news for today. Well done. I was also going to talk about the workplace parking levy because I live in Leicester, where it's just gone down. And in the discussions about the levy, Nottingham had a very clear ask. They were going to fund the tram system from it. And so Leicester were advised of that when we decided we wanted the workplace parking levy because we wanted a workplace parking levy. And that's similar numbers to yours in terms of how many parking spaces and so on and so forth. I chair a small voluntary organisation. We run a project. We've got too many parking spaces. You know, it was going to cost us money. We run a managed business unit. It was going to cost us money. And actually what's really, from my experience from the outside, killed it off is the unions made very, very strong claims that businesses and organisations that would have to pay the workplace parking levy would push it onto their staff. And so the mayor, with admittedly May elections coming up, and we don't have a cabinet, we have a city mayor, said this is not the time, cost of living crisis, can't load any more money onto anybody else, so we're not doing it. The ask had become the electrification of our bus service. So we have park and ride electric buses, and we're increasing that. We've got a big bus plan and so on to electrify everything with 8 different bus companies. But yeah, I would be very, I see that Ruth has suggested that Adam Clark, who's the deputy mayor who was leading on it, would like to speak to this group. I'd recommend that you be in on that meeting, on that active travel thing, because I think I can see the value of it totally, but I can also see how it got lost in Leicester. I've got to go and get in an SUV and drive to Cannock Chase now. Sorry, everybody.
Well, it's good that you can, if you can share. Thanks for that. It's really, really helpful. I'm going to go to Dave in Glasgow. Dave, over to you.
You're muted.
Yeah, go on, Dave. You can do it. If you want to.
Nope.
No.
Can't hear a sausage.
Sorry, Dave. Sorry, Dave, we can't hear you at the moment. If you want to have a little play with your tech.
I've unmuted now. I've unmuted now. Is that better?
There you go. Off you go, Dave.
Right. Couple of things. First of all, in Glasgow, for the past 17 years, we've had a free pedicab going up and down the pedestrian zone, picking people up. And I think, you know, there will be some less ambulant pedestrians, inverted commas, wandering around a large area, which is a traffic reduced or a traffic free zone. And I'm looking at the idea we should be going for either pedicab, which is a very easy employment opportunity for the unskilled to cut their teeth on. The pedicab riders can be passive policemen because they're obviously looking at what's going on around them. They're useful information centres because people ask them directions or where they can find a nice restaurant. And, you know, it's, as I say, it's an employment creation thing that's low impact. What's your thoughts on that? Or electric autonomous vehicles, or alternatively, electric buses that run fixed routes. a high frequency and a free to board within that area, and then you keep all the out of town buses outside that zone, because it strikes me that quite a lot of the time the bus companies are desperate to take their buses right into the centre of town, and you end up with a wall of double-decker buses, which you see on Oxford Street, both in London and in Manchester, which are virtually empty, queuing up to get in and out of town. So what's the thoughts on, flexible alternative options to move around with?
So pedicabs is interesting. We're looking at for when the Botley Road closes, because I think we're going to have problems with pedestrians with limited mobility. My councillor colleague in the area is looking at getting something similar to go underneath the railway bridge, which doesn't give you much.
Well, the railway bridge is quite low. Yes, it's always been a problem since they got rid of the level crossing.
Exactly. And I know that we used to have a taxi cab service, the pedicab equivalent in Oxford, run commercially until, Robin, you might know, but like 2013, something like that. So, a lot of people are keen on them relaunching. It's something that our local bike couriers, Pedal and Post, are looking at, but they're also looking at a zillion other things because their business is exploding. We'd love to see it. I'm not sure how it would be funded. We'd probably rely on a commercial agency, but it's interesting to know that Glasgow did it because I didn't know they did.
Well, can I run through the economics? Is that Tom has been running on the basis of advertising on the pedicab. And the cost of the advertiser is about the same as a single 6-sheet poster on a bus stop. So for one poster that's static on a bus stop, you get a rider with a pedicab that's advertising your business, who can also hand out flyers. It could be sponsored by the rail operator, because they could have a real-time train departure information on the pedicab. And people say, I want to get to the station, when's my next train? And the rider can give them that information. And it's a useful sort of low level skills entry job, and it breaks the cycle of you can't get a job without a reference, but you can't get a reference unless you've done a job. And so cycling does that. The other little question I'd like to ask about the Radcliffe Hospital, that must be fairly close to the park and ride site that's outside at the old quarry sidings. And I've been doing some stuff in Glasgow. We've one station which has 1.8 million boardings a year, compared to 250 to 300,000 boardings for the adjacent stations on the network. And the reason is that it's only a 10-minute walk from the main door of the hospital. It's a well-lit route. It's quite easy to use, apart from wading your way through the car park. And the station is advertised, get off at this station for the hospital.
I'm just going to...
Yeah, I'm just wondering whether that...
It was...
Yeah. That's the 2 points I was making. That's all right, Steve.
Brilliant. Thanks, Dave. Sorry to rush you. It's just we only got to 6:15. Now, from the hands in the air that we've got, I've got an order. But Robert Campbell in Newcastle, you look particularly keen to come in, and we've already heard from Ruth and Mark, so I'm going to bump the order. And Robert, did you want to come in at this point? Have you got something to add on this bit?
Yeah, as many people will know, I was one of the founders of ZMove, a cycle courier company in Newcastle upon Tyne, which we've had to close down because we didn't support from pretty much anybody within the local authority committed enough to make that business. There are lots of other reasons as well, but that was one of the main reasons that I decided to quit the business. The pedicab issue is one where we were constantly asked by several people within the industry or within the local authority to try and provide, particularly by the local authorities, by the local hospital network, to say we can we put on a pedicab service particularly between the central station and the hospital, the two major hospitals within Newcastle. That is the RVI in central Newcastle and the Freeman. All of those things are possible, but there are two overriding circumstances that prevent you from even thinking about doing that sensibly. One is the cost. A decent pedicab vehicle is going to cost you at least 18 to 20,000 quid. We're talking about the Armadillo with a separate courier box behind the back, for example. And the second thing is, none of that obviates the need for ultra secure cycling infrastructure between those environments. So that by far and away is the most important thing. So the services follow the infrastructure. The use follows the infrastructure. And without the infrastructure segregated, secure cycling infrastructure, you can't do any of those nice things at all. Full stop. I decided, we were asked several times, as I said, to run a pedicab service. And the 2 or 3 times we really looked at it, despite the fact of the finance side of things, was it's not safe for my riders to ride with a person behind the back in the infrastructure that we have or fundamentally don't have. So everything follows the cycling infrastructure. And I think all of the discussions around anything else it's about infrastructure, please. Thank you. Rant over. It was one of those things I really wanted to do, but never could do it.
Thanks, Robert. That's really good input. And one of the things we love about this gathering is there's an expert on everything that can go really deep. It's amazing. What minds. Robin and Emily, I'm going to take Ruth and Mark really briefly, and then come back to you, both of you, just for last words before we wrap up, because we're aiming to finish at about 6:15. So what would be nice if Ruth and Mark, you could be really brief, and then Robin and Emily will get your last thoughts before we all wrap up and go and have our dinners. So Ruth, can we come to you first and then over to Mark?
Yeah, fantastic, Emily, brilliant. A couple of things. I hope maybe you've been to Delft, because they have been very aware about people not being able to get into the pedestrian areas. They've got fantastic little mini electric 6 people thingies. I can't put pictures up, so I don't know how to share, but I could put it on, email it to you if you like. Also, I did get the bus from London to Oxford, and since the bus has become environmental, there were only 2 spaces for the bikes on the back, and the guy refused to let me carry them up the steps, and I'm too short to do them. Fortunately, I had a tall partner. In Rethymnon in Greece, bizarrely, you can just put them under in the belly of the bus, which is quite fantastic. So where luggage goes, you can just shove them underneath, and that's amazing. And I did have a question, of course, I've now forgotten, because I wanted to tell you about these mini bussy things that are fantastic. But thank you, you're inspirational. And Robin, of course.
Brilliant. And Mark, over to you.
Well, it's mostly been done in the chat, actually. I wanted to ask about bike share, but there have been various people answering questions about it and discussing it. But if Emily wants to say something about it, that'd be great.
Yeah, no, I mean, we used to have bike share, as you know, we had several different companies. We are evaluating it again. We've had a really successful time with Voi and the e-scooters. I personally, and controversially, kind of hated the bike share schemes because they were left littered all over the pavements. The pavements in Oxford are very narrow. It's a medieval city. They were an absolute nightmare for just so many elderly and disabled people. And, you know, that can be solved, and I think now is more solved, but I think it's really, a lot of people feel very burned by the bike share schemes, and the bike share schemes not taking responsibility for their bikes being littered everywhere. And, you know, it was a huge relief to a lot of people when they went. So I think with that history in the city, whilst they're being looked at, we're going to have a solution where they are not left obstructing everywhere, which I think they could be ring fenced as Voi are. But yeah, so it's being evaluated, but with a caveat that if people feel burned from last time, if that makes sense.
If you go for a free scheme, you get what you pay for, and that's what happened.
Yeah.
And don't use Voi bikes. I used one in Liverpool last week.
Oh, good. That's a good tip, actually, because that's interesting. Yeah, and the painted bay, I think this is worth actually talking about as well, because of ETROs, because if it's on the highway, you have to do a whole load of more legal stuff. So actually, most of our Voi's are on the pavement, because we do have places that you can put Voi's. We have certain bits of wide pavement. They don't fit bikes. So if we were going to do bikes again, they definitely have to be on the roads, and then we definitely have to have allocated spaces for them. And actually, we don't have enough spaces on the roads in loads of our roads. We'd have to like put them sideways. It's more complexity than it might sound. I think in theory it's a great idea. You know, there's just a lot of hurdles that we need to get over.
Brilliant. Robin, thanks, Emily. I'll come back to you again for any last thoughts before we wrap up. Robin, what about from you? Anything on those last few questions, thoughts?
Yeah, that's good. I mean, I really like the comment. I've forgotten who said it, but infrastructure, everything follows the infrastructure. I mean, we've worked a long time for this. It's not until we find, when it happens, which won't be for another year, that we'll find out how good it actually is, because there's a lot of exemptions to the traffic filters. And so we'll find out how people react to the fact that they've still got so many permits. Will they spend all those permits, in which case there'll still be a lot of traffic, or will they think, oh, I'm mostly restricted, so actually I'm going to start really changing my habits? And so it's very much going to be experimental, as in it's an experimental TRO. So we're still going to have a lot to learn, and I'll come back in 16 months' time, and I'm sure we'll tell you about what we've learned.
Brilliant. Thanks, Robin. Right, we're almost there. It's almost home time. Emily, any last thoughts from you before we wrap up?
Yeah, I just think it's to kind of come back again to this link between campaigners, councillors, and really understanding how the politics works in your local area. So, for example, as a Green Party city councillor, I'm much freer to say stuff and do stuff than it would be if I was a decision-making cabinet member. And so, like, honestly, and so, that's sort of worth bearing in mind. I'm not a campaigner and I can't be a campaigner, but I have more flexibility because I don't have the legal kind of requirements and constraints of decision-making cabinet members. So that's really worth bearing in mind. I also think that when contacting your local councillors, there's a real temptation to contact people like me who are really in favour of active travel. But that's great. But, I'm already in favour of active travel. You don't need to convince me. I'm interested in specific things that are relevant to my ward. But actually, what you need to do is convince other people, other councillors. And most councillors will have a thing that they're kind of passionate about. And often that is social justice of some form. It might be public health, it might be equality, it might be the kind of, children. And actually active travel benefits essentially everyone. It benefits climate change, it benefits public health, it's street safety. There's a lot of, for kids, there's a lot of reasons why people might want to do it if it's framed to them in the right way. I think it's, once you're into active travel, it's very easy to forget what it, that people that aren't into it don't really know about it. And so, take it back to basics, explain to councillors and people why it matters. And honestly, political support is really important. Like, if you want to get something done in your area, your officers won't do it unless they have broad political support. So kind of, it's important. You need to be, campaigners need to be tactical. And yeah, just a shout out to campaigners. Like, it's amazing. I mean, Alison Hill is here from Cyclox. Cyclox has kind of transformed and just taken so much leadership in cycling in Oxford. It's not the only organisation. We have a lot of other organisations that advocate for pedestrians, for clean air, like lots of really important things. And I think the campaign groups working together has been very effective in Oxford. They don't campaign on the same issues, but they do know each other and they talk to each other. And maybe that's a topic for another time, but really, campaign groups, brilliant. That's all I wanted to say. So well done.
Thank you. On that high octane, which is a very unactive travel phrase to use, so I take it back immediately. On that very energized end note, perfect way to leave it. All I would say is, Emily, we've loved having you with us. Robin's with us every week. We're not bored of Robin, but you've been brilliant to have with us. So please do come back. For everybody who's asked in the chat, yes, obviously we'll be sharing the slides. They'll be up on the website as usual. We'll have another session, as you know, next week. Ranty Highwayman can't be with us this evening, so apologies for no good, bad, and the ugly. And final thing from me before wrapping up is, Emily, love the cable car, go for it. The Metro cable in Medlan is a signature of their net zero aspirations.
I have literally spoken to them about this. I love an urban cable car. You've heard it here first, guys. It will happen. Thank you for your support, Steve.
Yeah, I'm all over it. Just let's message each other separately. I'll come down and do a presentation on cable cars and how cool they are.
Brilliant.
Just don't get them mixed up with zip wires, otherwise you get humans and gondolas and it all gets messy. Brilliant. Thank you ever so much for everybody for being with us. It's another good one. And we will see many of you again next week. So good evening. Cheers.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.